I saw a notification on Notes a moment ago. Did you add something?
Yeah, I added an after show topic.
Okay, I didn't scroll down that far. That's why. I was like, just glancing, I didn't see anything, but I wasn't sure if it just hadn't refreshed appropriately.
It's really helpful on the side where it says activity and it says, Jesse made edits. I'm like, okay. I guess that makes more sense when you have multiple, more than just two people editing a note.
Yeah, I think the big thing is just that, like, I only scrolled down to see if there was a topic change. I didn't keep going, and that's on the phone. You know, if I'd pulled it up on the Mac, I would have seen the whole note anyway.
Right. Well, I was going to say, no, sir, this is a very interesting topic.
And so let's lead into that a little bit, because I don't really know what I think of the topic, and I feel so immensely unqualified to even explore it, which is, of course, why it's perfect for the show. But like my biggest question is, can you think of anything even remotely close to the level of constitutional dilemma that this represents? Like, taking all the details out of it, just there's no precedent for what we're going to talk a little bit about that I'm aware of anyway.
To be fair, the phrase, there's no precedent for fill in the blank for the past 5-6 years has been
true
a running theme.
So, but before we actually divulge what we're talking about, let me two quick bites, the second of which actually leads into the topic anyway.
Ooh, I love a little teaser. So when I said that, I was trying to, the way I said it, I was trying to embody or impersonate Christoph Waltz's character from, I think, Inglourious Bastards, when he gets excited. That's a bingo. Is the reference lost?
Sort of. So, full disclosure,
I will find the soundbite. I will find the soundbite.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Is that the way you say it? That's a bingo.
You just say bingo. Bingo! How fun!
I watched Inglourious Bastards once. I enjoyed it. I just never have gone back to watch it again. And typically, most films, it takes me that second and sometimes a third watch to really retain a lot of like more minor references. And I don't mean minor as something that would be, forgettable or unforgettable. More, my first watch through is almost always just the overall high level story. And then I retain details after that. Just the way I view movies, apparently, or TV shows for that matter.
I think that's fairly common.
And it sounds familiar, but I would not have gotten it without it being explained in this case.
I mean, I love explaining my own jokes, so no worries.
All right, so Bytes. The first of the two that I have this week, I felt was more of a PSA kind of thing, because this was news to me and seems like the kind of thing that could be easily missed with our current news cycle, because it's not a verse from We Didn't Start the Fire. Right, I mean, I guess it could be. But the article is titled Hiding in Plain Sight. Good Housekeeping wrote it. And
that surprised me that it was a Good Housekeeping article.
I know, and that's not normally something that crosses my radar either. But I do feel like this is an important thing to make sure people know. Apparently, hemlock, and I don't know if I didn't do enough research to know if there's a difference between poison hemlock and some variant that I'm not aware of that's not poisonous. Because I found it odd that the article kept saying poison hemlock. Like I thought hemlock was poisonous, period.
Right. It's like, this is redundant.
Yeah. But anyway, so it continually refers to it as poison hemlock. But apparently it's a very invasive species that has been spreading throughout most U.S. states. And the article talks about a specific case in Ohio where a man was doing yard work, used a chainsaw. The theory is that that created enough of an aerosolized version of the hemlock that he was cutting for him to ingest it and become poisoned. This is kind of scary, actually, because hemlock is a very dangerous plant. Everything about the plant is poisonous because the chemical that is toxic to, I assume, all organisms, but for sure humans, is throughout the entire plant. And so just, picking it and getting some of the sap like on your fingers and then accidentally ingesting it, and you're poisoning yourself. So I highly encourage at least reading the article and getting an understanding of what it's talking about. The main thing I would point out for the sake of the bite is it's a white flower, has a purplish stem, and has been described as being wispy or willowy, a lot like parsley would be. So if you see a flower matching that description, be wary. It is similar in that regard to a non-harmful flower as well, called Queen Anne's lace.
I'm familiar with that one.
The distinction between the two, one is apparently time of blooming, but the other is the whole purplish blotchiness to the stem. So yeah, highly encourage everybody to be aware of what plants are appearing in their yards or wherever they may visit outdoors.
Well, that's very good to know.
It's also good advice in general in the Southeast, I feel like. I run into a lot of people that don't spend a lot of time outside of more urban developments, and just knowing like poison oak, poison ivy, obviously hemlock now as part of that group, but just knowing what plants you may be likely to encounter is a good rule of thumb when you go venturing outdoors.
Yeah, I love being outdoors. I still have difficulty identifying poison oak, poison ivy, more poison ivy than anything else, because there's several different forms of it, but it's relatively low stakes. So
yeah, most people don't have a severe reaction to poison oak, poison ivy. I know it's one of those odd things where, quick kind of side digression, allergies are a strange thing, right? So poison oak, poison ivy, apparently you can not have reactions to it for years and years and years, and suddenly you do have a reaction to it. And it's I don't remember the type of reaction that's called. There's obviously a classification for it. Where I find this is interesting is that something like penicillin is not that way. Like, you cannot develop an allergy to penicillin. Either you are allergic to it or you are not. And I found that to be extremely interesting. And that was courtesy of a discussion I had with an allergist in the area when we were talking about a dentist trying to blame amoxicillin for a reaction that I had. And the allergist said no. Like you could, with any derivative of penicillin, you could take it the first time, be okay. The second time, maybe you'll have a reaction. But if you haven't had a reaction by the third time you take one of the penicillin derivatives, you are not allergic to penicillin, and you will never develop an allergy to it.
I did not know that.
I didn't either. I found that to be quite illuminating, because I know that other things you can eventually develop an allergic reaction to.
Or have the allergic reaction go away.
Yes, that's a thing as well.
Yeah. I feel like that's less common, but I'll need to talk to an allergist sometime soon.
Yeah, I won't go into that story this time, but we'll kind of put that as something maybe we'll delve into when we don't have other topics to explore. So the other bite that I put in was actually preceding some of the other information that we've learned about the overall general investigation into the January 6th attempted coup. And I'm going to continue to refer to it that way because that's what it was. The article for the Bytes is that a judge ruled that Trump's lawyer or legal advisor, former professor, last name Eastman, could not cite client-attorney privilege to withhold documents from the Judiciary Committee investigating the January 6th events because the evidence was, I'm not going to say clear, the way it was phrased was the evidence supports the idea that his legal advisor and Trump more likely than not committed fraud in the events to overturn the election. And so I didn't realize this. Client-attorney privilege does not include any conversations where the client and the attorney in question are actually attempting to commit or further a criminal act. And so the judge basically ruled that the evidence was in favor, that this was more likely than not engagement of a criminal act, and so the attorney Eastman could not claim client-attorney privilege and withhold the documents from the January 6th Commission. And that's the extent of the Byte. Since then, I've read a number of other things. There's been some analysis, some more recent breaking news than that particular article that influenced me sending you the information that I thought might be worth discussing as the topic for the show. And part of the revelations here, I don't really have a solid grasp on the quality of the source of information, I guess is a good way to put it. Like this is a person who is obviously active in social circles enough to be verified as far as identity goes. Certainly to some aspect a legal scholar, and talking about some different things around what we've learned about Jenny Thomas, Judge Clarence Thomas's wife, and her messages to Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, and others that seem to indicate a very robust picture of crafting a, for lack of any better phrase, a constitutional crisis where you have a far-flung legal attempt to retain power. And this goes back to the argument that the vice president could ignore certified electoral results from specific states during the ratification process. So I think this is a lot of bits and pieces with supplemental material that take us back to the events of January 6th and the narrative that we were told surrounding what that attempt was. And I feel like I talked really strangely through that, but it's such a strange situation. I mean, so as I've read all of this, what keeps coming to mind is I'm reading facts that to me read like a conspiracy theory. And we know how much so many Americans love conspiracy theories because they've latched on to them so passionately over the past couple of years and then some. And yet, in the face of unequivocal facts that read like a conspiracy theory, those same people who latch on to conspiracy theories are seeming to just be blind to it. And I don't understand that disconnect. That's where my mind is going into, I'm not even sure how to talk about this. And so that's why I thought, you know what? This seems like a great show topic, because more often than not, talking through something with you leads me to find a way to actually verbalize what I'm thinking in a way that I, for some reason, can't do without talking through it, which is part of why I love our show. And so that's where I am. And I'm blindsiding you with, what do you think? You know, it can be additional details or additional thoughts from anything that you've read as well. But I think this is going to take a multi-layered, high level, and then kind of drill into a specific aspect over and over a couple of times before we even get to what are we really even talking about.
So my initial thoughts are like the stupidly obvious, and that is so many people have already made up their mind about what they already believe. And if whatever you're presenting to them, factual or not, if it doesn't fit their narrative, they reject it. And they find different ways of rejecting it. All of the conspiracy theories that have no factual basis are easy to accept because there's nothing that ties them down to a place where they have to commit to believing the truth. That's my initial thought.
So I see where you're going with that. And I don't dispute it, because one of the great things about conspiracy theories is that, of course, you don't have hard evidence to support it because they're covering it up, right? Like that's the general mentality.
Right.
How can you not say trying to withhold information isn't the same thing as covering something up, though? You know what I mean? Like it's one thing to say, sure, I'll turn over all this stuff. And sure, it sounds damning, but I can make some rationalization that it's taken out of context because who knows what other conversations were being held. You know, we find ways to rationalize that thought process. It's ridiculous, but that's a whole different topic. Part of the appeal of a conspiracy is that you have to really dig in and find those things to support a theory, and they're typically not clear-cut support. And that's what makes it more intriguing, because you feel like you're finding and discovering these puzzle pieces, maybe, is a good way to think of it. But if you look at what's actually coming to light, and as we learn more and more, it's further pieces of a puzzle really coming together to show that the initial thoughts of a person in power strategically creating an environment to attempt to retain power was nowhere near as far-fetched as scholars and others wanted us to believe. So isn't that, by its definition, an understanding of a conspiracy that you just so happen to be able to find a few breadcrumbs? But I also don't want to get bogged down into the whole topic of, you know, conspiracy theories and what is attracted to one person's psyche versus another, because that's not quite the focus of the conversation. What I really am more interested in, even though my headspace has been focused on this reads like a conspiracy, why aren't more people latching to it? If we take a step back and just look at the facts of what we've learned, you have a current sitting Supreme Court justice who is married to a well-known extremist activist that has now been shown to engage in at least discourse that is meant to subvert a free and fair election. And that justice has thus far refused to recuse himself from hearing any cases, offered the only dissenting opinion in turning over records from January 6th to the Congressional Committee with regard to the lawsuit about executive privilege. who has recused himself from cases involving his son, and I'm not aware in this grand scheme of all these different pieces of how you can approach a life-appointed judge on the Supreme Court, or on the Supreme Court, in a way to stop him from actively still engaging in cases when you have a demonstrable conflict of interest. Like, this is the one place where I'm not aware of any mechanism to stop that, right? You know, you think about lower courts, and you could have a higher court say, no, you are recused from hearing the case, or some other level of checks and balances. And part of this is my lack of knowledge about what the Supreme Court can and can't do within itself as well, because I've seen a couple of articles that have at least presented the opinion that at the end of this discussion, it is possible that maybe the Chief Justice could impose recusal, maybe not. Like, there's no written explicit method or pathway for handling the situation. And that's more what I find intriguing about how events will play out. But at the same time, like, I just don't know. You know, like, that's the big thing. Like, I don't even know what my next thought is.
Well, damn, because I don't either.
I've been all over the place today trying to find a more cohesive way to explain it, and I have nothing. Like, it's so mind-boggling. Because on the one hand, like, I think about, if I am a judge, if my charge is to uphold the law, how could I ethically hear a case with a conflict of interest?
Right. The question is, where is the check and balance for, like, judges continuing when they don't recuse themselves for obvious conflicts of interest? Where's the check and balance from the legislative or executive branch of the government?
Right. And that's it perfectly. Because in every other court, you have some additional layer that provides that. And worst case scenario, if you went to the federal appeals court and you had this particular issue, it could be appealed to the Supreme Court, right? But at the Supreme Court level, what's the answer? And I can't think of a function where we can impose anything on the Supreme Court.
Right, because you can't get a bunch of, lesser courts, combined to overpower the Supreme Court. That's not a thing. So it would. I feel like it would have to come from another branch of the government.
But at the same time, a Supreme Court appointee is appointed for life unless they choose to resign.
Right?
Yeah.
I
mean, is impeachment of a Supreme Court justice even a thing?
Not that I've ever heard of.
Me either. But I've seen that phrase show up in a couple of articles, but how much of that is this a thing versus, no, we actually found where this is a thing? Because I have yet to see where anybody has spelled it out as, this is a process you could undertake to remove a Supreme Court justice from office.
So, suffice to say, like, if a Supreme Court justice was caught doing something illegal, arrested, there's that, I assume. So at what point can you say what you're doing is illegal? It's like, you can't break the law if there's no law for to break.
Well, and in the same vein of thought, there's nothing that says that a Supreme Court justice could be removed from office for breaking the law.
But if you go to prison for breaking the law, you're obviously not going to sit on the court. Do you
get removed from office?
Well, I was just going to say, do you maintain that seat until your death? Maybe. I feel like that's not a scenario that anyone thought this would play out in a way, but
I agree.
I don't know.
And again, this is also where like I'm just so horrifically underqualified to speak to the workings of what it actually means to sit on the court. I realize this. There may be a very clear answer that I just don't know. But I would like to think of myself as an above average American citizen, but let's just say an average American citizen, I have no clue what the next steps are in this type of scenario. And it scares me.
I think part of it is that nobody's ever been faced with it, and so maybe that's why. And let's say there is no provision for this. Well, I guess the check and balance is that there could be an executive order or a law written by Congress to create the check and balance. Like, they can create the law.
So I would agree with the Congress aspect, but I'd be willing to bet that an executive order would be struck down as unconstitutional.
From the very court that they're trying to write a law about.
Yes.
So,
and here's the reason I say that. An executive order only requires one person to issue it, right? The executive branch.
Right.
I would expect any executive order targeting the Supreme Court to be overruled because there's no provision in the Constitution stating that the executive branch can do something to influence the court.
Right, because that also seems like a conflict of interest as well.
Right. And so I understand why that's probably not the case. But I absolutely think that a majority of Congress could pass a law stating in the event, or actually
it's even more than a majority.
It might have to be an amendment to the Constitution,
right.
Actually, now that we're talking through it.
And then you're getting like 2/3 and
right, which would be practically impossible in today's Congress.
Unless we're talking about like moving clocks around throughout the year.
Yeah. And I think this is why this whole situation, and I mentioned it scares me. Like, I'm not going to say I'm terrified of the outcome, but this is what scares me about this situation. You have a legislative branch that is obviously willing to spite itself to prevent change in order to give itself a hopefully better chance at retaining power. And so anything targeting the court is probably going to be split pretty heavily along partisan lines. Like, you might have a few here and there that actually think I'm going to do my job and actually, listen to the arguments, that kind of thing. But I don't see a 2/3 vote of anything passing Congress, except for arguments on daylight savings time. And so in today's court, which is where any of this current situation is going to ultimately be heard, because let's face it, no change is going to happen fast enough for any of the current story arc to, draw out like 3-4 years. I really wonder if the court would be partisan or objective. And I feel like the court would end up being partisan. I don't know why. I just, based on, well, I do know why. I know why because not striking down the Texas anti-abortion law is dumb as fuck, and it's obviously partisan, right? I have evidence in recent times that the court is not acting in good faith according to legal precedent and really just doesn't seem to care about anything other than the actual strict letter of what the Constitution states. Precedent and interpretation and everything else be damned. So I don't see how anything coming from the investigation into January 6th results in accountability for any of those involved or any action against any of those involved, which is the part that infuriates me. Because we can see it plain as day. And yet, none of the actors involved are going to really suffer any repercussions.
Right.
I mean, the Department of Justice hasn't even launched a formal investigation into anything. That's red flag number 1.
It's still being covered up. It's still being actively... I don't even know what
it's
it
not
is.
even being covered up. It's just being ignored. And I think that's
Yeah.
the part that's so infuriating. Because Lord knows if I went up to the Capitol and stood on the steps and complained and argued that whatever election was invalid, I would be arrested and thrown in jail. But a group of people storming the Capitol after various people in positions of authority encouraged them to do so, fuck it, we'll pick a few and incarcerate them. No, everything about this seems wrong. And I don't get it. Like, that's the part that's a problem.
There is no justice when there is no justice. There's only corruption.
And I really do think part of it is really... Go ahead.
I was gonna say,
I'm not sure I have a good crafting of my thought yet.
The only people who have stuck, the few people that have stuck their neck out are being ostracized. Like, they are a beacon of truth in a sea of malice and lies, and they're being ostracized, and nobody's supporting them.
And in most cases, they are being actively worked against. What's a better phrase?
They're being penalized.
That doesn't quite capture it either. Actively persecuted. I think persecuted is a better word.
Punitive measures have been taken against them.
Yes. And the reason I wanted to emphasize it that way is just because every single person who has spoken honestly and openly about what all of the events leading up to and including January 6th and the way in which political parties have influenced discourse either are not continuing to serve or have had challengers who offer the alternative pro-election fraud, pro-MAGA discourse being supported and championed. Like, how does that fact alone not raise a red flag? Because, like, I don't know about you, but I have some pretty strong opposing views to things that I've heard from Romney and Cheney and Kissinger, for sure. But they've been honest in their assessment of the GOP agenda. I kind of respect speaking out against the party you're affiliated with and calling it wrong and saying that it needs to change.
Yeah, I think that how they've handled this has been respectful. You can respect somebody that you don't agree with on most things. You can respect them because they're standing for.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And let me help with the verbiage. They're standing for the principles they have espoused.
Yes.
And you can always disagree with principles. That's the nature of politics. Like, your choices on what takes priority may not match mine. That's normal. That's how politics works. The problem is that for years now, we have been entrenched in this, you don't like my ideas and policies and politics, and so you are my enemy and you must crush or suffer severe defeat because you are obviously anti-everything. That it's maybe too nice a way to put it, actually.
It makes me think of this lyric from a song where it goes, "We're anti-everybody."
I feel like I should know that.
No. It's It was like a CCM song, contemporary Christian music.
Yeah, I wouldn't know most lyrics there.
That's what I'm saying. But it just reminded me of this lyric. We're anti everybody.
I'm just such a loss on the conversation, really. Like, and here's, I think this is part of why I'm so confused and lost by it. So we have the current, Eastman, assuming he doesn't appeal, documents will be turned over. But if he does appeal, where does that appeal go? Goes to the Supreme Court, right? Like, I think that's the next step. I think it's currently in the Federal Appeals Court. If not, there are maybe one additional step removed. But if he doesn't appeal, apparently, legally, any of the people who could be a subject of that set of documents being turned over could also launch a lawsuit to keep those documents from being exposed. So you could have a long line of people potentially attempting to block those documents for a long enough and protracted period of time that it becomes problematic from a just general investigation viewpoint, right? Like that's concern number one. Concern number two is, let's say there are no appeals, there are no lawsuits, documents are handed over, and this goes to the Supreme Court. At best, you've got one justice who would elect to recuse themselves, which I just really don't see happening based on history. 4 justices who have repeatedly shown a willingness to vote or rule along with political party ideologies, and 4 justices who would most likely rule more in line with what the law states, which tends to be less politically influenced, but still, I'm not going to say there's no political influence, because there very well could be, right? But in that case, you have a 5-4 decision that everybody involved with a violent attack on the Capitol is free and clear. How do you rationalize that? Because I certainly can't. But there's no additional recourse after that.
I don't know.
This is why I have struggled so much with trying to figure out what I even think of these events.
You're a lot further along than me in this struggle, but I'm barely keeping up here. I'm like, it feels very like it feels kind of like the Twilight Zone.
My hope is that over the next couple of days, because a lot of what we're talking about is very new news as of today, the 29th. Maybe over the next day or two, we'll have a lot more in-depth analysis that will help me understand better. It's mind-boggling how all of this could happen and there be no recourse for it based on how the different components were crafted in the first place.
You mean like how the Supreme Court was stacked in the favor of the offender?
Yeah, without saying it specifically, yeah.
I mean, that's one part of it.
And the other part of it is how Congress really seems to be stacked in favor of maintenance and acquisition of power and not legislative action.
Right, they're suckling at the teat of corrupt power and are too afraid to stand up on their own. And the ones that aren't too afraid, there's too few of them.
Right. And in fairness, like I do want to call out that how much of the Congress aspect of it is just right timing, right place, versus a actual strategy of getting to this point, because I don't feel like the strategy was there. I feel like a lot of this is right time, right place kind of thing.
I think it. Well, I think it's. I don't think it's so. I don't think it's so. Oh, it's just the right time and the right place. I think there were a lot of things that led to creating this environment.
I could agree with that as well.
It wasn't strategic. Like I'll agree. I'll agree with you.
Yeah,
that it wasn't strategic.
That's the main point I wanted to mention, is that there's not a overall grandmaster villain orchestrating up to this point
that we know of.
Right.
But but that's totally conspiracy theory without a lot of support for. But there are players behind the scenes that are pulling strings. One might suggest, but
many of those players who have been around for quite a while. I mean, there's certainly a potential for that conspiracy theory aspect, right? Like
I think
it's not overly far-fetched.
Right. I think those big players that we might be alluding to right now are also opportunists. They're from changes of the past 40, 50 years. The political decisions, really the past 40 years. And so, I think there have been some strategic moves, nothing that's orchestrated, but things that have come together, and I think there's more the culmination of events by chance than strategy.
So my general gut feeling on it would be the same. I'm going to posit a question though, and this is me trying to be far-fetched and flung out into the realm of conspiracy theorists. Okay, so bear with the question. What if it comes to light that one specific individual in a different country managed to orchestrate the creation of this environment in order to fulfill or attempt to fulfill their drive for acquisition of power and actually succeeded?
I don't feel like that's terribly far-fetched. I think we are living a version of it.
I don't either, which is part of why I wanted to posit the question.
Yeah. Now, is that one person responsible for the past, the past 40 years of this, a political shift that's happened over the past 40 years? No, I don't think so. Have they been taking advantage of it for maybe the past 10, 15, maybe even 20 years? Definitely 10, give or take.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how global politics can also influence and drive changes in domestic politics.
I think I can't remember if this was in the recording from last show, but we're in a place where nations don't make sense anymore.
I think that was last show.
I can't remember if it made it into the recording.
I'm pretty sure it did.
But like the concept of this nation versus that nation, these arbitrary borders, made up borders, it's old fashioned and a bit long in the tooth.
I think the way I would potentially rephrase that, not to change it, because I think that's 100% correct, but I think just to illuminate a specific thing that people may not be immediately thinking of in hearing that, we're not living in an age where geographical boundaries mean nearly as much as they did, a decade ago. How much information you're receiving from one source versus another influences your perspective and outlook a lot more than where you live or where you work or, any physical boundary. Because you could live and work in the United States and receive absolutely zero input or information from American media. That's not far-fetched.
Right. Well, I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the first time I was presented with the idea that nations are outdated and old-fashioned and are it's ready to be replaced with a new type of government is something I heard more than 10 years ago, but the past 10 years have drastically made that point, that idea, far more relevant.
So the piece that I was going to, it's tough to really illustrate it without thinking of what is a common thread among groups of individuals, right? So within the United States, you could say there are plenty of different groups that share commonalities that form different pockets of, ideas, policies, etc. And we certainly reference that when we think about regional and cultural differences and everything else. But where I want to take us just a little bit further, overall, you have to look at Earth as a just general repository for different groups of ideas, right? Because the same ideas that you encounter in one country, you will find in pockets in another country. That doesn't make sense. So if ideas and practices and philosophies aren't the thing that you can find some level of homogeneity among a population, what can you look to as that just singular or even multifaceted common ground in a region? If you find a common thing in a region, guess what? It matches a common thing in another region, and in another one, and in another one, until you realize that that common thing is humanity in and of itself, right? There are always going to be differences in practices and beliefs and thoughts and everything else. The one commonality that you will find in any subset of people is the basic set of needs that humans have. Those do not differ from one group to another. You might want them to. You might even make arguments that they do. And if either of those other two statements apply to you, you're full of shit. Every human has a basic set of needs. That is what is common in any population. You can't draw geographic borders around basic human needs.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.
That was well said.
I felt like I kind of struggled a little bit to get to that point. I knew what I wanted to get to saying, but I didn't know how to articulate it until I got to that last part. It literally took me like 2.5 minutes of just kind of winding through until I figured out how to say it. I do think I'll wrap the show there, though.
I think so. I mean,
tonight was such an oddity because I had no clue how to talk about what it.
I mean, you have no clue. I'm even more clueless.
Oh, the days we live in. I really want to hear Billy Joel do "We Didn't Start the Fire" version 2, and it just be like 2015 to now.
Oh my God. 2015, I didn't think things were going to be like this. I'm just like, so now it's just
2020, we didn't think things were going to be like this.
That's fair.
I think 2020 was really the demarcation point between things are kind of up and down and iffy and, oh my God, what's next?
Yeah, 2020 was very much like, what the fuck every day.
I do at least feel like we're better now, even if the world overall is in a worse state, if that makes sense.
It does.
Because, like, at least now we kind of have an expectation of what's coming our way. The world is just more chaotic.
I guarantee to you, though, in 20 years, not over the next 20 years, but in 20 years, the crime rate in Texas is going to skyrocket.
Yes. Yeah. I'm betting 18, but sure.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of after show. I just thought I'd give you an update because something did change.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
I've been feeling a little... Past few weeks I've been feeling discouraged. And I was like, you know what? I'm discouraged. Like, and I feel like I've even my climbing has regressed. I feel like I'm putting in more effort, having more difficulty climbing easier routes than I was maybe 6 months ago. And I'm discouraged to even try more. And so I was like, you know what? I need to lift weights because that's a really good... That's one of the best ways for me to start weight loss. Because that's what I need, and I think that's what would help my climbing. So I got in the gym and I started lifting this week. That's my update.
So I'm going to take it a step further just because.
Yeah, that's what you do.
Yeah. There are many days that I have felt discouraged in general from whatever goal, right? But I remember back to the first 6 months where, like, for a week, 2 weeks, I would consistently weigh in a little bit less or feel a little bit better or be able to do just that little bit more. And then there would be a backwards point. And sometimes it was a couple of days, sometimes it was a couple of weeks, like that backwards point kind of shifted. And it was during those times that it was really difficult to say, I'm going to keep doing this for any reason, right? Because it's obvious there's a negative direction to progress, and that's what you're on, and it's really tough to say I'm going to keep trying when I'm regressing. The one thing that I would want to harp on is that every single time, as long as I continued to do something, I would then leapfrog the progress I had made. Our bodies do everything they can to make activity more efficient, which means that we will always be on a trajectory to a better position and always have periods of regression as our body gets more efficient at the thing it is being asked to do. The trick is to remind yourself that period of regression is going to happen. Just show up and do it again. And that's it. It's like, I just want to make it motivational because there are so many days that I've been there and I felt that frustration. And I made the choice that nope, I'm still going to take those steps today. And then tomorrow, maybe it's still a regression, but I'm still going to take those steps. That dedication to still taking the steps pays off in the long run.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. It's stuff I know, but it is really good to hear, and it's encouraging.
And it's stuff that we all know. Like we all get it, right?
Yeah.
Like you get results when you put in the work.
Right.
It's just we tend to forget that every time we do something new, it challenges our body in a certain way and makes it, react in a way that indicates progress. But we do it, 2, 3, 4, a dozen times. Our bodies naturally attempt to do the same activities more efficiently as we engage in them. And it's remembering that little detail that helps us remember to keep going forward.
Yeah. The body's always trying to maintain homeostasis.
Yes.